Very good evening and welcome to Random Access. I'm your host, Robin, and I'm here to interview Mark Taylor, a cinema DSLR specialist. Now, I've noticed there has been kind of an interesting trend to get away from, we'll say, the conventional means of recording film and video and going with the DSLRs. Can you tell me more about this?
Well, sure. You really have two different categories of people trying to create films. You have the low budget stuff, and up until DSLRs, they were mostly using the smaller chip cameras or really small film because that's what they could afford. With DSLRs, that was really the first time you had large sensors coming down into the affordable range. So lower budget films could actually be producing quality content that looked like high-end film cameras. Okay,
so it's the image sensor that's larger, and I take it that it's larger than, we'll say, your standard high-quality, we'll say, camcorder. I know that that's not used anymore.
Well, camcorder is still a fairly accurate term for any camera or video camera that has an integrated lens.
Right.
If it has a detachable lens, you generally just call it a camera. At least that's the way we usually talk around here.
Right.
So the DSLR is really more of a still image camera. Once they went digital, they became effectively just video cameras that took very slow frame rate videos if you just held down the shutter. So the main thing was to wait until the technology got there so that you could record longer segments of video.
Yeah, technology, I know it keeps evolving, and each time it evolves, it seems the next evolution after that, it's even faster.
Yeah, the frame rates has been probably the biggest thing that they had to improve, because obviously they already had the pixels, it was just getting the frame rates.
Right.
And that's really just starting to evolve to the point that we're now getting 30 and 60 frames for 4K. The older generations of cameras were stuck at about 30 to 60 for HD, or 30 to 60 just for standard definition.
Okay, so we've taken, basically, sounds like a quantum leap.
It's at an acceleration point.
Okay.
So your normal cell phone can easily take 4K video, but that's mostly because the processor is designed for just churning over large quantities of data. With DSLRs, it's not intended, the processors inside the camera aren't up to that scale. They're designed for something different, which is simply pulling information off of the sensor in a very fast way, but then it's not about storing it and then going after it again. It's about one-offs.
Okay.
And because of that, DSLRs have been a bit slower to integrate the higher resolution videos.
Now, about how long since, when did they start, we'll say how long ago did they start advancing to the point where they became actually very usable?
Well, the Canon 5D Mark II was the big shift with video.
Okay.
That was in 2008, and it was pretty much the instigating technology for independent filmmakers and others that were trying to make video on a budget. What it was trying to replace was the lower end film cameras or digital film that were costing anywhere between $10,000 and $50,000.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Red, and I remember how much that cost.
Yeah, the Red, when it first came out, the Red 1, that was looking at about $50,000 to $100,000 for a full kit. And that was considered a price break from the $500,000 digital cinema cameras that were before it.
Right. Now, question. The Red came with interchangeable lenses, and I know SLRs and the DSLRs have interchangeable lenses, but I do know that there was a quality difference. Are cinema lenses available for the DSLRs?
really what you're looking at is the lens mounting system and then what they're being designed for. So with cinema lenses, they're designed so that there are no bump stops with any of the controls. Within a lens, you've generally got the focus, zoom if it has it, and then the iris. The iris on a film camera or a film lens has no bump stops, so it's not going to give you a little bump every single time that you hit a different f-stop. What that's useful for in photography is making sure that you know exactly where you are in terms of the exposure. With film, you don't want that. You even might want to be able to smoothly transition from a bright scene to a dark scene as the lighting conditions change. So being able to rack the iris around is very useful.
Yeah, I remember having a situation where someone was coming from the outside of a building, inside of a building, and it had to be a complete smooth transition.
Yeah, and so cinema lenses, that's at least one of the differences. The other major difference is photography lenses are typically rated with an F system. So you'll have an f2.8 lens or an f1.4 or an f4. Whereas cinema lenses are typically measured with the T system.
Right.
So that would be a T1.5 instead of a 1.4.
Which is, I believe, a more accurate measurement of the light passing through the lens.
It really has to do with where you're measuring the light within the lens. With an F system, you're measuring it at the iris, so just beyond the iris. With the T system, you're measuring it at the back of the lens. So if you're looking for scientific evidence as to exactly how much light is getting through the lens, the T system works better. However, both systems work just fine if you're looking for relative brightnesses within the same lens.
Now, I do have a question. I grew up with the standard film SLR, which you're right about. I had an auto winder which gave me about 5 frames per second. Not very useful, but now the question is on audio. How are they handling the audio?
Well, the first generations of these digital cinema SLRs, they didn't have any real consideration for audio. And that's sort of a pull from the film era where the film cameras didn't really record the audio either.
Right.
You recorded it separately and then you would combine it together later in post.
Right.
Well, that is somewhat useful, but you also need to still be able to line things up. So they eventually started adding microphone inputs. And while they're not professional grade, they're enough that you can get a feed from the audio person to at least record a lower quality that you can then use to match the higher quality that you're recording through the audio person.
Right, because you can use the DSLR as a scratch track for audio.
Exactly.
So, but you know, the thing is, if you're feeding it a good quality audio from the audio board, it's still going to be better than just the microphone on the camera.
Very much so. Most of the DSLRs that do video have an integrated microphone, though just like the microphone on your phone or anywhere else, it's going to be very susceptible to any handling noises.
Right.
At least with my original 70, any autofocus that the camera did, you could hear the servos in the lenses
I
throughout
didn't
the
know
whole
that.
thing.
That's a good one.
So it wasn't exactly an ideal audio source.
But it looks like they've really improved things. Now, is there any difference in setup if you're going to be using, we'll compare a film camera to a DSLR for doing a movie?
Yeah.
Or I've seen commercials being shot on them.
Well, the big thing that a lot of the cinema cameras are really known for is their accessories. So you'll have a matte box on the front that helps to prevent lights and other objects from glaring on the lenses that they use. You'll have external focus controllers. It's for basically the position of a focus puller.
Right.
Now the DSLR photography lenses, they don't have anything specifically for that. Typically with cinema lenses, they've actually got gears on the outside that allow you to hook up a focus puller mechanism.
Right, the knob on the side.
Yeah. With the photography lenses, you can just get these gear wraps that just wrap around the outside of the lens, and then the gears will fit to that.
Yeah, I know that's what you recommended for a project here, and it's working very well. I have to congratulate you on that.
Yeah, so the cameras in our studio are camcorders, so they don't have the external gears on their lenses, but using the lens gear wrap, just wraps around the lens, and then the focus mechanisms can just click into that.
Now, actually, I think that still the most important thing is to use any of the cameras, even stills, you have to have a story behind it, an idea as to what you want. That goes into a whole different subject, so we're not going to cover that, but do you have any recommendations? Like, if you had two cameras, would you change a script slightly for the two different cameras? Just out of general curiosity.
The changes that you would make depending on which camera you had available, or you might choose a different camera based on the script. And generally, I would, if at least it's not a budgetary constraint, I would change the camera based on the script, not the script on the camera. The main reason would be if you've got a really dark scene, you might pick a camera that has better low light performance.
Yeah, that I can easily see. Like, there's a difference between, we'll say, a romantic comedy and something like The Addams Family.
Yeah, so, but this could be just as simple as you have a candlelight dinner scene.
Right.
Well, that is going to have very low light because the candles supposedly don't put out tons of light, so you can't have sunlight equivalent beams of light just lighting up the entire thing. So you would want to have a camera that can see very well in low light. Whereas conversely, if you were shooting out in the middle of the day, you'd want a camera that had very wide dynamic range. So it still had detail in high and low light situations. So that would be the shadows behind somebody or the highlights in front of them.
Right. Okay. You're talking about dynamic range. Now, one of the biggest selling points, if I remember, was the dynamic range. Would take a multiple exposure and then combine them to create your full brightness to darkness range.
Yeah, so those would be HDR or high dynamic range images.
Now, we're running short on time. Do they exist for the cinema DSLRs?
Not for DSLRs. They're currently in the higher end cameras like the Airy or the Reds, but they're not available for DSLRs yet in video.
Okay, but for stills, they're still available.
Yes.
Well, I do thank you all for watching Random Access. Best wishes to all and have a very good evening. And thank you.